we are extremely lucky now to welcome one of our care unit alumnus. Is that going to be the term? I don't know. This is the Hotel California that you can check out anytime you want, that you can never leave. And Annie LeBlanc is one person that joined us after training in Canada. In Quebec, we started working on shared decision making, and we here developed a number of different programs, particularly has stayed in the literature, I think, as a landmark trial of helping primary care clinicians treat patients with depression and doing shared decision making, figure out how best to treat them. She, after working in the Center for Science and Healthcare Delivery at Mayo, she went back to Laval University and is now a leading researcher. You're the Canada chair, Canada Research Chair, implementation. And so we're going to hear about how do we implement the sustained care levels. Annie LeBlanc.
Folks online, I just want to let you know that we do have your chat questions that we can see. We moved on because of time, but I hope to have some time for questions at the end as well. So
I'm going to be short, and then I know.
Perfect. We'll do more questions.
As I always say, but it never happens. Oh, so nice seeing everyone. I couldn't help thinking, as I was listening to the previous discussions, I am way too practical. It's going to be a hard to following all of this inspirations. But I couldn't help thinking, thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for telling us everything that is happening right now and what was happening. And the only thing I could think of, being a researcher and having kind of this researcher hat, was that, so here's how we learn to do research. Here's approach A, approach B. Here's how you do a statistics. Choose a population, choose a disease, choose a context, choose one thing, study it, learn about it outside work. And then you try to figure it out. Oh, it doesn't work. Why? Because care is messy. Because care is what happens on a daily day. Because your life happens around care. So it's really interesting to think how, and this has been actually one of my interests since I've been back to Canada, is how do we create that capacity, and how do we think in terms of research that cares, and research that actually fits the purpose of care, and not textbooks and methods and one-on-one research approach. So what I was hoping to do today, well, a couple of things. I just want to say that there's no conflict of interest, and I didn't know we're in a school of medicine. I wanted to be by the book. None of the things that we're presenting today, most of it is the work that we've done at Care Unit, because I thought we could build on it through the discussions over the day. So nothing that we're presenting here is for profit at all. And if you do want to send money, send it to the Patient Revolution. And would love to see how we can do some of that work. So thinking again, how can we together think in terms of those practical tips? So that's why I said from the inspirational, what I thought I would do as kind of some of that first initial talk is just give us tips and examples and ideas that we can start building on, opportunity for us to ask questions, to discuss, to go in the hallway and say, oh, this never happened to us, to move us away also from the scientific papers. Because it's always nice in our papers. We always tell the main story. We always report our primary outcomes, and we never tell the whole story of how this project or team or this team came to be and this project came to be, and everything that happened behind that beautiful paper that was submitted in 2,600 words or less. So little things here and there. Don't hesitate to ask questions, and hopefully I can keep it under half an hour so that we can have a double discussion. So I wish I could see something else than this. because it dates from 2003, so similar now as when CARE was created. But 20 years later, unfortunately, it is still accurate. It is still accurate in that we invest billions in research, we spend billions in healthcare, yet we know that we have the knowledge, we know that we have the capacity to deliver that care, but we just repeatedly fail to do so. So hopefully in 20 years from now, when we do the CARE 40, CARE 25, I don't know. We actually have more of a hopeful thought. So, and why is this? And why is this? Well, again, I wishing that this slide would change. We've been carrying this slide for 20 years, but still the same, still accurate in that we do a lot of work. There's a lot of clinical research that translates into knowledge synthesis, and that we're gathering all of these studies and trying to implement what we're learning through the course of the research spectrum and the research continuum to care. But unfortunately, from all of that studied out there, what actually makes it to the clinical encounter, which is on your far right, is very little. And most of the time, it doesn't work. It isn't what we need or what we want. But going back, how do we actually change this? Because unfortunately, a lot of what we do is that we repeat the same mistakes of the past in thinking about what's being done. And we're a CARE team here as part of the CARE unit, and we've done a lot of knowledge synthesis. But the reality, for example, is that knowledge synthesis, we're just repeating what has been done 10, 20 years from now. So we're accumulating all of these outcome and information about things that may not matter to patients. So even when we go back down that road, how do we make sure that the basic clinical research that we do is the one that matters? How do we make sure that the outcomes that we're gathering from years are not the one that's been there forever, but rather the one that should be there and isn't? And how do we actually shed light to those outcomes, and that we can bring those back to caring for our patients? So another way to think about what I just said is this notion of it takes forever to get funded, it gets forever to do work and to do the projects and everything, but yet, unfortunately, the way that we've been going about it for years, and luckily for us, for the past, I'm hopeful for the past 20 years, well, 10 years or so, we really see a lot of changes, but we've been thinking about it in the same way, like I said earlier. Let's do this one trial, this second trial, this third trial. Let's do it in such an easy, in such a straight setting that it actually doesn't resonate when it gets into the practice. It doesn't regulate. And as you go along from that one intervention to actually being implemented, being normalized or sustained in practice, you've lost most of its relevance and its impact. But I love what I've been seeing for a little bit over the past decade, which is, how do we work to actually not only streamline these processes, but do the work in a way that is meaningful? How do we work? And one of the major things has been that patient revolution around research. With PCORI, with the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research in Canada. So finally realizing that we cannot do research without the person for which it is designed to go to. So, and it's been exciting to see for the past decade the work that PCORI and others have done in terms of patient engagements and other knowledge users' engagements in their care. So hopefully there isn't any study yet on this, but hopefully we're working towards that, shortening that translation of information and working in a way that we're designing intervention, we're designing the way that we want to proceed with the reality of it, the context, and starting from the ground up so that what we're doing actually has a higher impact. And this is another way of showing, and this is where we're going to show, is it not?
They're not seeing that. So I'm going to fix it while you keep talking.
Okay. So So yeah, so, and this is a way of thinking about it. And how do we work from that? Because I've just said, we're working from designing this one intervention, this one focus, this one tool, this one approach, without thinking, oh well, we'll get, you know, and that's the downside of research. Well, we'll do this one grant, and then this other one, and this third one, and if we're lucky, we'll get a fourth one, and then we'll try to get to implementations, and then integration into care. How can we actually bridge that? We should. And this is what I was thinking, you know, in thinking of, you know, rather than thinking about this one tool, and I think this is something that CareUnit has done, and all of you here has done phenomenally well, and that is always thinking through that, is that nothing is by itself, everything is in the dynamic that works all together. So as we're thinking about, let's design this tool, well, this tool is going to live where? It's going to, you know, how can I maintain this tool or this resource in the environment for which it is being designed, hoping that we can actually create research that gets embedded afterward, because the likelihood of us getting more funding to test it out more, unlikely. And I love what was presented today. It's Maureen, Sheila, sorry. Sorry, I'm getting to. And I love what Sheila was saying, because you're right in that there's a research that happens at the point of care, but then there's everything around. There's the capacity, and there's those different levels that impacts onto what we're doing, and we need to bring them on board as well. So it's not only research at the point of care, but it's research at the point of care with everything moving around. So can we and should we, oh, and now I can't. Okay, I'm just trying to see which one, Casey, do you know? I can't seem to be able to change slides now.
The arrow's working?
The arrow's not working. Oh, it goes, okay. I don't know what I did, it's working, okay. So, so can we conduct research that actually cares about what it's trying to do, and research that is done at the point of care for care that fits and that lasts? And I think the lasting piece, we have still a lot to do. So Victor was saying in introduction, you know, how we sustain this intervention. Well, you know, plot twist, I have no answers for that. So you can go and have a break, but at least we can start thinking about it and planning ahead. Show hands if you've ever used a decision aid, developed a decision aid, been involved in some kind of shared decision-making activity as a patient, as a clinician, as a researcher, as a student. Also, I'll see your hands up. Yeah, keep it, okay. Keep it up if you were part of a study that actually tested the efficacy or tested that decision aid in practice. Okay. Were you part of a study that actually looked into ways to implement a decision aid, building on different kind of strategies to work around that tool being implemented and sustained in practice? Okay. So you're lucky enough that study's been tested, implemented, those decision aid, you got the result of that implementation study. Have you ever gone back to look at sustainability of that decision aid and what has been done years later? So 20 years of CareUnits? Okay. So again, but it's hard because as much as we want to do it, as much as we're saying that this is important, the reality is funding doesn't follow that type of work around sustainability, because they want the new things, they want the new tool. But you know, can we say right now that what we've been doing actually worked? In the sense that has it been implanted and used and normalized, and has it become the norm in what we do? But I think it does, but I think it does, and it's meaningful, but it's just for us to, again, it's to how are we going to bring some of those issues? So the next few minutes, And please tell me when it's 4:30, please, so that I'm gonna try to make it 12 minutes. Okay. So just a few example of what I meant through that journey of developing a choice to where we want to go. And one of the first thing that struck us and was this notion of we've always thought, how do we move from that complexity of knowledge to its simplification, and simplification in a way that is meaningful. And I think that this group here has done phenomenal work in that sense. Maggie was one of the pioneer in doing this type of work, but from having all of those clinical guidelines and having all of those different reviews and work around what works and how and to what extent, and being able to turn all of that knowledge into a simplified tools and way that both clinicians, patients, caregivers, anyone that is involved can actually engage in conversation and engage in those activities. For me, that was kind of my first takeaway with this work, is that there's always ways to simplify the information that we're trying to convey, simplify also the way and the process by which we want to do so. We worked also a couple of years back on a severe aortic stenosis decision age, and one of the things that's right. So it's one thing to have that knowledge and to have the information and to be able to say, oh, here's how A versus how A compares to B. What's one of the lessons that we've learned from this decision aid was, while it made a big difference in prolonging life. And it was huge back in the days when TAVR came out, and everyone wanted to really work around that longevity. The reality was that that's not the way it headed with patients. As we started to do the work, what they really wanted to know was, they were more focused on the quality of the remaining life than on the quantity of what they had. And that what really mattered. And we went around in a different way in moving that work forward. So sometimes the knowledge we think we want to share might not be the one that is necessarily wanted. And one of the things that I'm pretty sure we're going to hear this week, and that's why I don't want to get too more into the details, but one of the things that I took away from my years here is this notion of, it's not about information, it's not about making sure that we're bringing what people need to hear, but it's rather how do we create those conversations around that information, and how do we care, and not just offer choice, because it's been one of the challenges that we've had in shared decision making, which is kind of giving the responsibility to patients rather than engaging in meaningful conversations. So I'm sure we'll hear more something this week from Jan and his group. Another element in thinking about the way that we do that research is evaluating the relevance of the measures that we're using, and the intended consequences that could happen throughout our decision aid. And this was our first study working with patient advisory group a while back. And it was really interesting because it was this bunch of researchers who decided that we're doing this decision aid to help choose for antidepressant, but might as well do stigmatization because we can. Let's add this new measure to this trial. It's not going to matter much. It's 5 more minutes of patients' time to do this survey, and we'll be able to make things count twice or 3 times or so on and so forth. And we worked for weeks to trying to find the best psychometric measure and to find what worked well and the questions, and we were all confident that we had the rights to use the tools. We didn't have to pay for it, and it was appropriate. Then we meet with this group of patients and clinicians, advisor and staff at one of the clinic downtown. And they, we're sharing everything that we're going to do and the tools and sharing the measures. And suddenly someone raises their hand and says, "You're not doing this." "What do you mean you're not doing this?" He says, "You can't do this measure." "Of course we can. It's a valid measure. We looked it up. We've got the rights. Everything's okay." And I say, No. You're going to create, it says, you cannot give that to patient. You're going to create challenges for these patients. Because remember, we're doing research at the point of care. So patients are coming in to see their clinicians. They're either been depressed for a while, or they're going to be just diagnosed with depression. And suddenly they're out of the encounters trying to just deal with that fact. And we're asking questions. Please answer yes or no. You're not going to have any life after this. You know, your family is not going to see you ever the way they did before. And then it's like, okay, no, and so on and so forth. And thank you for your question. Please proceed, and you can go home. And the clinician just went on and said, there's no way you can do this. And they were right. They were right, because we could have created, significant negative impact on these patients. Whether the questions and the answers were right or wrong, the questions were still there, and it still impacted that the way that they could see their disease. So this notion, again, from a research perspective, that you just pick what's worked best and what should be done, it doesn't apply in real life research and research at point of care. So we didn't add this measure. We lost a few weeks of work, and then Victor's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" Well, apparently not the right thing. But we did well, and it was the same way with all of the measures and everything that we did with them really mattered to them. The same way as we're working with them and we're working with clinicians, this is a topic that really resonated for them, because the primary care clinicians, they do struggle with antidepressants and depression. And as we were going through that, we had a clinician raising his hand. It's like, why don't we get any survey? Whereas we've always, the first thing we say, try to do, we do want to burden clinicians. Let's do as little as we can for clinicians for the practice. They were the one who actually asked us to say, we do want to see, we do want to hear, we do want to know how we're doing with this measure. And they actually, so we added measures specific for clinicians, and we got a 30% improvement in comfort with the decision, in their satisfactions, in the way that they wanted to do this work. So it was really, in the end, beneficial for the trial and for them. So be careful. And it was funny. This was actually on my social media this morning. And I thought that was really nice. I had a discussion about measure with Yan yesterday. So I thought that was actually really relevant in that, the same way we think about hospital measures and, and performance measures and so on and so forth. So that was kind of my clin d'oeil. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Last, I think this is my last example on the value of the intervention versus the temporary necessity of the research burden. And this is my serious moment, if I have any, because this is something that has been on my mind for years in trying to understand what we're missing, what we're losing from this type of work. So here's the two decision aids, two of the decisions that we work here. The diabetes choice and the depression choice. Similar decision aids, similar principles, similar everything. We've done our trials in similar ways so that we could all compare it and so on and so forth. Yet for two similar tools, we got really two different responses in the way that we conducted our trials. The diabetes decision aid was the first one that we've developed, and it was developed in a really innovative way by care unit with practice and clinicians and patients and so on and so forth. And it was kind of the first time that we were one of our first initial trial at CARE. It took us a little over 4 years to recruit 20 practice, 99 clinicians, and 350 patients. We had a goal, I don't know, can't remember if it was 500 or 600. I think it was 600. And what we were seeing where we were in those practice, so it was very formal. Can we have a 15-minute presentations? And we would go to the practice And that was kind of actually my initiation at Care Unit. I think the second day I was in Minnesota, I couldn't barely speak French. Victor said, here's this guy, his guy's named Nile. Tomorrow you're going with him and you're traveling to Wisconsin to give talk and to meet clinicians and everything. I was like, oh, oui. So, and it was really enlightening during those meetings, because it struck me that everything that clinicians were asking about was, okay, how much time is it going to take me? Can someone else do that, tools? How long is the study? How long are you going to, be here? We need to think about it. So there were not once was there a questions about what we wanted to do, what we were trying to achieve, what was the tools. It was all about the study, and we were creating burden for them. So it was really that struck us. That was really really strong way. A couple of years later, we come back with the depression choice decision aid. Some were the same clinic, some were different. But we've developed these tools with the practice. So we were with them. We went. They saw the different tools, and that's where we started to involve patients and clinicians. Everything that I've talked about, the measures and where and how, and should we do this? So they really helped us shape not only the intervention, but they helped us shape the research behind how to recruit patients, how not to talk about depression because it didn't mean a thing for them. We had to talk how they couldn't sleep and how, we're trying to help them get more energy and feel better and so on. So they help us shape our language, where to contact them, how, and so on and so forth. And we recruited 300 patients in less than 2 years across 10 clinics, and 10 were our maximum clinic because I think we could have recruited more. And it was really interesting because it was all about, what do we get to play with? Can I use it? Do I have to? See what I did with this other decision aid. I've put it on my phone and see what's there. They were engaged, they were excited. We actually had one clinic who decided to leave our study because they found out that they were in the control group and they couldn't use the decision aid before 2 years from now. So they've actually dropped down so that they could use the decision aid. So this notion that sometimes and the outcomes were different as well. We showed broader impact, because we actually could, we included more measures, more facts. So we actually saw a big difference between the two. So my question is, was it the intervention or was it the research? And in doing this, how often is it that the way that we do our research and then we're finding negative outcome from those research, was it because we didn't do the trial right, or we didn't do the study right, or was it because the intervention wasn't working? So how often are we missing on something that would have been valuable to patients because of the way we've designed our study around it? And here's another example of that. Oh, I'll skip this one, but I talked about it, is the way that we recruited the patients and how they helped us. But this was about the complexity. Again, our decision aid, you pick it up, you can use it. Anyone who finds it on the streets can just grab it and then know what to do with it, compared to, this is actually the process of, and I didn't put the study there, but this is a process from some of our colleagues. This is what they did to implement their shared decision-making work. This comes from one of their studies. So there's also that simplicity of implementation. We talked about the tools, but the implementations as well. But talking about implementation, our latest study that we did was the shared EBM toolkit. Although everyone worked well, everyone was able to use the tool, some of our studies showed that they weren't actually using it the best that they could have. So we said, well, let's do this study where we're going to promote all of our tools and let's listen to what people want. So we went to all of those clinics and we actually developed everything that they were asking us to do. So for all of decision aid, we had the online version, we had testimonies, we had tutorials, we had QI, quality improvement initiatives, right? Like, name it, name it, we had it, like journal club videos and whatever. When they actually got to do it and use it in practice, so the toolkit, it wasn't used at all. Neither the implementation or the dissemination arm used any of the tool or activities, but the tools themselves. So we didn't see any difference in the way that the tool was used, because we show that one the implementation team actually used it a little bit more, clinician used it, but at the end there were no statistical difference. But what was interesting, two things, so that again, so we always say what is the thing, to be able to know what people need, but sometimes what they want might not be what they need. So we have to be also careful about that. And we have to design in what's going to remain within that practice. So maybe we were a little bit too excited about all of this, thinking that maybe if we find what works, we could kind of piggyback on it and move forward. But what was interesting that we realized through the qualitative work that we did with that is that clinicians did not actually make the difference between the decision aid and our research. Because the negative points that they had to do about this work was how they had to do tallies for how many decision aid that they did, which was the research. In reality, you use it with your patients and we're not doing anything, but this came out and everything we're talking about them, about how they've used the tool, it was always around how, while they had to do the tally, they had to do this and they had to document and so we realized that we've dropped the ball somewhere along the line for this. But had we not do qualitative work, we could not have, understood those different distinctions. So all to say that for those that know our close colleague, Victor Montori, not Carl May, you're not Carl May. He's done a lot of work around that normalization process. And I just want to say that this work around normalization process, if you remember, one of the things that this work can be done for the intervention, but it can be done for the research and the way that you do your process as well. We never got that study funded. That came from a grant that we write, but it's worth reflecting on. So thinking about what matters in conclusion, can we do it? Yes, but we need to do it with everyone that is going to have a stake in the process. Involve patient early on, other knowledge users, foster ownership, which is aim for normalization from the get-go, not just this one study, because we often do this. Oh, give me 2 clinicians and we'll be out of the way. Give me 3 clinicians, but aim for that normalization from the get-go. Engage the whole practice, particularly post-pandemic. I mean, people don't stay in their positions, they move up, they move out, and then that team that's there for you, it's not there. So we always say clinical champion, but they go. They think when they move. And then the biggest impact for lowest amount of work, because this is probably what you'll get in anyway. And always aim for that softness of footprint, but above all, don't let the research get in the way of care that fits. So there you go. And now we've got
I think we have,
time for
yeah, we have 8 minutes for
discussion.
questions. So I'll open, I'll get this up so we can see in our Q&A. Okay. So I don't see any Q&A for Dr. LeBlanc yet here. How about in the room? And Victor has a mic, Maggie has a mic. We do need to talk into the mic so that our friends online can hear questions if you have.
This is not all.
Yeah, there's a switch.
This one is all.
Online, can you all hear that when JP is talking?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Audience mics. Okay. No, okay. Try now. You hear him say hello? No.
No.
Okay. I will repeat the question for now. We have our IT person coming after we're done here today to check on some of this stuff. So hopefully we'll resolve it. But for now, JP, just go ahead with your question and I'll repeat it from here.
Very interesting, the research of the intervention school. One thing I struggle with is that I become very pessimistic with decision-making trials. In particular, because I think people use it, we ask them to use it. So it's used as requested rather than used as needed. And we are seeing in research on something that the author here we are doing some research in those encounters, and we are trying to get good conversations trained on visual intelligence system, and the conversations we could have used were the ones with decision makers, because they were fake, they were scripted, they were not real conversations, and yet those ones are the ones who score the highest in the measures that we have.
So I think,
It's very easy to become pessimistic about that. So I think it's also the way that we sign the trials.
Can you summarize the question? And
So that's actually a really good question about how pessimistic and how relevant with the quote, but how pessimistic we are with our decision aid trials and how they do it because we ask them to do it. One of the things that I talked earlier, I briefly mentioned, was this notion of capacity. And again, one of the realities that our clinicians are also at capacity. We talk a lot about patients, but we cannot forget the clinicians. They are being asked to do extraordinary things. They try to do their best all the time with whatever tools and resources that they have. And I'm saying this because, again, and this is a fault from among others from research, is that we keep adding. Oh, let's try this new tools, let's try this new process, let's get this new guideline, so for diabetes. I remember once I was working with a clinician and I said, why are you not using a decision aid? And he opened the EMR and he clicked and says, which one? Because all of the quality improvement, all of the other work, everything was now embedded into the EMR, and he just didn't know what to do, what to choose, what to pick. So we've been doing a lot about adding. And I think that one of the reasons that there's a couple reasons and suppositions that I have, but there's that one is for sure, is that for me, every time, if I'm thinking about adding something, it's like, okay, what can I take away? Because we need to stop taking away, but it's not popular, it's not sexy, no one wants to say, what have you done in your 4-year term as a congressman or whatever? Oh, I remove things. It doesn't work that way, but I think that that's one of the things. So we need to think about how are we creating that capacity for our clinicians and our practice to be able to engage in those conversations. So that's one. Another part also is that we've done a phenomenal job to work to developing tools and activities that are meaningful for patients. And as clinicians, we want to do everything that's meaningful for our patients, but we may not just have the time to think about it. So, and I think that might be, for example, a difference between, if you remember, and no one's seen it, and I think Mike is online, with Mike, we've tried to develop a decision aid for hypertension. We've tried for 2 years. I think there's like 17 different versions, and it never worked. No one were picking up. Clinicians were just not interested. They knew what to do. They started, A, B, C. They weren't interested, and clinicians and patients didn't want to hear about it. Didn't want new medications. So we couldn't get. So there was no what's in it, either for the patients or the clinicians, and we killed it. I think for diabetes, there's a strong what's in it for patients, and I think that clinicians do want to use it and engage with it, but then it's a matter of everything else around them that's compete. Whereas, for example, for the depression, they didn't know what to do. So there was a strong what's in it for them. So in a lot of our videos, actually, you can see the clinicians that takes out the card and use them for themselves. They don't even engage with it with patients. They go and they take it out and they lay it out and they look and they say, okay, I'm going to prescribe you this. So I think it's a mix of all of this in that I don't want us to, I want us to still be hopeful. And I think we need to think of the mechanical of what's around the decision aid themselves rather than the decision aid, and try to think what's in it for the clinician, what's in it, how do we make it that it becomes normalized in that discussion. But you're bringing this, and how many other researchers are bringing something else in those encounters and in those research? So how do we make that distinction and try to work towards supporting that type of work? But I still think it's better in the encounters than left alone and patients make their decision on their own at home.
Okay, one more question, and then we'll.
Thank you, Professor LeBlanc, Paul Barr from Dartmouth. One of the things I struggle with is I just don't think that our goals and targets are aligned at all. As a researcher, my goal is to get funding, publish papers in order for me to keep my job and keep my team employed. Clinicians, their job is to meet the objectives of the hospital. Patients get different objectives. And those desires to meet your own goals as a researcher end up with me developing things that will get funded, learn to be good at doing that, as opposed to what is necessarily helpful. That's the real truth of it. So how do we overcome that?
Probably the next 3 minutes. Repeat the question.
Oh, I have to repeat the question. I can't, well, how do we solve the problem of the world of trying to get funding where funding might not be aligned with what clinician needs and what patient needs, and how do we make all of these different competing interests work? I think that's the $1 million questions that we need to answer, and I actually have no word. Because you're absolutely right. And I think that by co-creating together, and I think that that's what PCORI has tried to do, and that's what SPORE in Canada has been trying to do, which is, making the voice of the patient stronger. But I feel bad saying this, but we also have to be careful because, again, what the patients want, what the clinician wants might not be what they need. So how do you make that distinction? And how to make sure that we don't repeat the stories that we did where we're funding research that we already know the answer for because it was private. So I think we just need to be careful about how we move forward. But hopefully with all the movement in the patient revolution and others, we'll be able to align. I know for Canada, they're moving with the Impact CV now, the narrative CV, which is about showing how your work has mattered to patient and clinician, rather than a number of publications. So it's a big thing happening right now. There's a lot of hard conversations, but I think that that's an example of things that gives me hope in terms of we'll be able to align all of these different ways of thinking.
Perfect.